Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is your Friday Roundup.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, congratulations. You have made it to the weekend, and this is your Friday Roundup. So today we're going to be talking about this past week's episode with Todd Tressiter. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Jonathan. Yeah, it's December already. It's kind of hard to believe the year's coming to a close. I got some vacation coming up here soon in about 2 weeks, and the holidays thereafter, family coming into town. There's a lot going on, you know?
Are you going to Mexico?
I am actually. So I am doing like the anti-travel hacker plan here. And I'm going to an all-inclusive in Mexico with my family of 4.
Sandals Resort, here you come.
Yeah, really. It is not a Sandals, but it's not terribly dissimilar. So, yeah, my kids, their school ends very early this year, just the way the weeks fell. And we decided, hey, we're going to take a 5-night trip to Mexico. And, yeah, it should be really, really nice. So, yeah, not using any points other than some points, I think, off of our Capital One Spark Miles card. So, you know, we defrayed some of the costs, certainly. But this wasn't like a real travel rewards plan.
Well, congrats to you and your family. So I went to go see Justice League the other night, and it was amazing. How could anybody not love that movie?
Very cool. I got the new Star Wars movie coming out soon, so I'm excited about that. I go to the movies basically once a year to see a Star Wars movie, and that's about it. So I'm looking forward to it.
I've been on a fast for a while. Just it's difficult when you have a newborn, and two, just life gets busy. Things fill in the cracks, and there's nothing's really come out recently that I said to myself, yes, I have to go see that. But there's been a tidal wave of epic superhero movies, and those are usually the ones that draw me back to the theater. So Thor Ragnarok and Justice League, I went to go check both of them out, and definitely worth the price of admission.
Very cool. And you and Danny did a date night, right?
Yeah, we did. We went to one of these AMC dining theaters where, you know, there's a little bit more of a plush experience. And frankly, I'll be honest, it was just based on showtime. We had to have a very specific time. But we sat down, and I decided to order a single glass of wine, a 5-ounce glass of wine, just to have at the dinner. And I was trying really hard not to be price conscious. And so I didn't even look at it. She didn't show me the price. I'll say, yes, I'll take one of those. I get the check at the end, and it was $10 for each glass of wine, and I about had a heart attack. I had to reel it all back in as we were leaving the theater saying, I will never do this again. I will always be price aware.
Wow. Yeah, that's tough. That's a lot of money for 5 ounces of liquor.
It was so expensive. How do you do this? I thought it was a bottom shelf wine.
And they thought you were a sucker who wasn't looking at the price.
That's
right?
exactly right. Do you just make this number out of thin air? All right. Well, let's go and take a few minutes, or not just a few minutes, probably the whole episode, to talk about the episode on Monday with Todd Tressiter. I mean, Brad, our audience has been waiting for this Friday show. You know they have. What an epic episode.
Yeah, there's no question. Episode 52 was maybe our most commented episode of all time. I know we had dozens of comments on the blog. We've had hundreds on Facebook, and people are polarized by this episode, I would say, right?
I think that's probably the right word. It's amazing to me. This episode is one that I think to some degree may have brought people back to the fold. As in, there's people that have enjoyed our podcast from the beginning, but at the same time haven't been able to completely relate to our choices or the way that we present things. Yes, they're tangentially tied to the FI community, but they haven't been able to find enough common threads. Maybe because one, they don't identify with index fund investing, or maybe they think that we're just not being diverse enough with the way that we're presenting all these different ways that you can grow your wealth. Maybe it's the fact that they've rejected some aspects of frugality. For whatever reason, there are people that identified with this message and identified with this episode more than they have with anything else that we presented up to this point.
Yeah, and then there were those who just, for whatever reason, had a dislike for this episode. And frankly, like, I'm not 100% sure what it was, other than maybe like presentation and tone, which is somewhat unfair. Todd is a really smart guy. There's no question about it. That comes across instantly. the way that he talks, I mean, he's very sure of himself. And that is a very admirable quality, certainly. But I think that just slight tone might have turned people off. But in fairness, like, Todd was absolutely wonderful with us. He was so gracious. He would have spent 5 hours on the phone with us easily. He was having a ball, and he's willing to come back anytime to answer people's questions. If we want to have a AMA with Todd, I can almost guarantee he'd be willing to come back. So, I think just the way someone speaks sometimes maybe can turn people off. But again, it's just because Todd is just so intelligent. And sure, was he a little cagey with some of his answers? Yes. And I think that was another slight criticism that people had. But I think Todd's mind works very differently. Like, I don't think he was being a jerk with his answers to the hot seat questions with, oh, that's just, my mind doesn't work in absolutes. I think that legitimately is how Todd operates, right? Like, we asked for the best and your favorite, and he's just legitimately saying, I don't think that way. And I believe him. I genuinely do. I don't think he was being hoity-toity about it or trying to be holier than thou or I'm better than you. It's just his mind doesn't work that way. So I found Todd a very engaging interview. I thought he was wonderful, has a ton of information. Obviously, he's extraordinarily intelligent. So, I want to say to the audience, like, maybe go back and listen to it again. Just keep that in mind and just listen to what he's actually trying to teach. I think there's a lot of value in it just for us, for the FI community, and for making us rethink how we approach financial independence to some degree.
I love that. And so now, since we've kind of talked, about maybe how people may have perceived the tone, maybe we actually do take a few minutes and talk about what he was actually saying in that episode and our takeaways, our respective takeaways. There is so much from this episode. In my mind, I think some people took it as crushing their hopes and dreams to some degree. In my mind, it validated everything that we're about here at Choose FI. Everything that we've been saying since episode 1, this essentially validated that. Was it a different perspective? And did it seem like at the face that he agreed with everything I had to say? No, that would probably be fair to say. But on the flip side of that, I may not agree completely with how he frames things. And that's completely valid. The takeaway for me is Todd was taking this is not wrong approach, but there's more. To me, that is empowering. And that's where I want to position myself. Think about this show. Everything that we've been saying since day one is you don't know what you don't know until you do. And we've started with the basics. We started with taking someone that maybe either just got to debt free or maybe had no idea that financial independence was a thing, had no single financial mentor in their life, and they've suddenly got a focus. They've started putting together 2018 goals, and they're starting to finally focus on their savings rate. They're crushing their debt. They're moving all of their money into these pre-tax accounts. And they're finally starting to get that modicum of control over their life. If you just took this episode at face value and all you went with was the tone, you heard someone say it's not enough. And I could see how that would be discouraging. But no, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is there could be more. And I think it's incredibly valuable for you just to initially lock on to how much progress you have potentially made over the last year and then get excited about how much more there is to learn. It doesn't invalidate anything that you've learned up to this point. It doesn't tell you that you're doing anything wrong. It just tells you that this game is fun and you need to be able to position yourself to constantly be able to get this flow of good information and figure out what's that next thing that I want to try? What's that next thing that I want to do?
Yeah, I agree completely, Jonathan, that it doesn't invalidate anything. I mean, really at its essence, what did Todd say? He said, things are not as simple as people in the FI community make them out to be. That I think the quote was, complexity better reflects reality. Okay, that's certainly true. He said there are other asset classes other than just index funds or just paper assets or whatever you want to call it. We know that to be true. We know that there are real estate asset classes. We brought Chad Carson on. We've talked about house hacking. We've talked about real estate investing. There are business asset classes, as Todd calls it. Of course that's true. We can build blogs. We can build businesses. We have Alan Donegan on the phone anytime we want to talk about creating businesses and basically creating equity out of nothing, which is what Todd said, right? Like Todd uses very complex language because Todd is an incredibly intelligent guy, right? And if you just can get through the language, what is Todd saying that's revolutionary, that makes us rethink everything or that we had to rethink the state of fire? Nothing. Todd is telling us what we know, but he's telling us that we need to look at it more deeply. And I agree with him. That is an incredibly insightful thought. And what else is Todd saying? there's no one size fits all cookie cutter answer. We know that to be true. Everybody has different life situations. Everybody has different risk tolerance. Everybody has different things that help them sleep at night. That's what Todd was saying, just in different language, right? When you actually think about that, can I, Brad Barrett, sit here on this podcast and say every single one of the tens of thousands of people should invest in low-cost passive index funds, and that's it? No, of course not. And if I ever gave that impression, I really apologize, because that is not my opinion at all. Do I think low-cost passive index fund investing is an incredibly useful and valuable investing tool for a significant portion of people, potentially? Yes, I do. I think if people are going to invest in the stock market, most people don't have the time or expertise or just dumb luck, frankly, to find someone who's brilliant at investing, at the Edward Jones down the road from them, or in their own lives, right? Their own selves, to beat the market. Okay? I believe that to be true. Most people, in all likelihood, are not going to beat the market. So if you take that as a given, low-cost passive index funds are a great way to invest, because you're just trying to match the market. You're not losing tons of money through expenses and paying for assets under management at the local investment firm. So do I believe that low-cost passive index fund investing is bad? No, of course not. I think it's brilliant. And I think it's a wonderful asset and tool for many of us to achieve financial independence. If I ever gave the impression that that was the only way, then I completely apologize, because that was not my intention. So I don't think Todd's telling us anything that we don't know at our core. I think he's telling us that we need to think about it more, and we need to talk about it more, that many of us in the FI community are too simplistic. And that is a perfectly valid criticism.
I would love to take just a couple minutes and talk through almost each of the individual key points and riff off each one of those individually and just kind of hit our takeaways. One was, he highlighted the fact that there are bloggers that have created essentially businesses that are generating large amounts of revenue. And he said, we can't just gloss right over that. I mean, that you have to highlight that and realize the value of that. And I almost wanted to take a step back and say that we've highlighted two different general approaches to this game. I think both are valuable, and I think you need to realize which one suits your unique characteristics as a person, and realize that you can win with either. And one is not better. It's not better or worse. It doesn't matter, but it's what suits you. And so in my mind, there's two different ways to pursue the income game or the entrepreneur game in the business asset class. One, you get your W-2 income job, you get your regular 9 to 5, and you crush it on that end. And you hike up your savings rate 20, 30, 50%. You quickly get some serious margin between your earnings and your expenses, and you use that to invest and create a small portfolio. I'm not saying that you necessarily get to 5, but you get significant margin between your savings and the financial cliff. This buys you peace of mind. It buys you freedom, and it buys you the freedom to fail, which then allows you to go pursue maybe this more creative path that maybe you were quote unquote scared to do from the gate. You're not all in now. Now you have this long runway, which you can explore your creative passions. And if you end up making it to 5 before you start that business, how much more powerful is that? Because now you're totally doing this from this freedom to fail type place. That in my mind is scenario one. And that is one path that we have and will continue to explore endlessly. The other side of that is the burn the boats. You say, wow, there are these real estate guys. There are people in real estate. There are people that are investing in business asset classes. And by the way, Brett, I'm going to start using that word. I didn't know what a business asset class or a paper asset class was until this episode. But from here on out, I'm adding that to the official lexicon. That is my new language. I love it.
Cool. Fair enough.
Okay. I don't know what I expected from that. I thought you'd be so amazed by my new language.
Yes, that is utterly brilliant, Jonathan. Tell me more.
Okay. The other half of that is this almost burn the boats type scenario. And you just go all in. You realize that if you can create a Mr. Money Mustache type blog with that massive amounts of traffic, or you can find a little niche, or you can find a business model that you can sell, or you can develop a small business, you can completely hijack the whole process. And you don't need to do the part where you're working in the W-2 job and you're creating the savings rate and all that stuff. Conversely, if you decide to take the real estate lane and you get a process that's working for you, that's based on the math because you followed, everything that Coach Carson is teaching, or what you're learning here, what you're learning over at Bigger Pockets, you get in that lane, you can quickly get 5 or 6 apartments or 5 or 6 homes that are completely paid off, that are cash flowing your life, and you're now financial independence. There are so many different ways to pursue this game. And Brad and I have taken the position that it's not our job to tell you which lane to follow, but to go out and find people that have done it in each of these asset classes and then have them share their actionable points with you. So you can say, wow, this is a life that I can get excited about. I want to try that and that and that and that. Or maybe just this one thing. But the point is that you take action and you start.
Yeah, there clearly are different lanes. There's no question about it. And it's funny because as I'm reflecting on this, I'm basically revealing my own biases in my brain. And that's a kind of a cool perspective to realize, like, you have these hangups that for whatever reason, past history, past investing mistakes, past difficulty starting a business, whatever it may be, those cloud your judgment to some degree. Because I still come back to saying, if I were trying to teach someone to reach financial independence, which I guess I am on this podcast, my easiest way, and if I were to do a state of the union of FIRE, it would be, how would I reach FI? Cut your expenses, save 50% of your income, and put it in low-cost passive index fund investing. I think that is the easiest way to reach FI. I think that's almost foolproof. I know that's probably a stupid statement. There are probably people yelling at their phones or their speakers or whatever right now. And I get that. I think saving 50% plus of your income, if you do that, you're going to be successful at FI no matter what. Sure, it might take you the difference between 7 years, 15 years, 20, but realistically, you're going to reach FI. I think that's the key. But my own bias is that real estate investing is difficult. There's a lot of risk. And there's the liquidity risk that Todd talked about. Everything could plummet like it did 10 years ago. Like, I have this inherent fear of real estate. If I viewed it as an actual asset class that I wanted to research and learn more about and find ways to dip my toes in, I suspect there are many, many ways. I know there are lots of these crowdfunding sites that I actually recently have started to dip my toes into through the help of Chad Carson and people like that. You got to educate yourself, right? It's easy to say, oh, real estate investing is scary, but you have to get over that. Business asset class, as Todd says. And I know Frank commented on our blog saying his take on Mr. Money Mustache's blog as a business missed the mark as well. That business was a success for Mr. Money Mustache, was a happy accident. It does not tell you anything about using a business intentionally to reach FI, and in fact suggests that you should play it like a lottery ticket and just keep trying until you, quote, get lucky. It was also only because Mr. Money Mustache had already reached FI and therefore had credibility in the space. Similarly, Chester's current business is not causing him to reach FI because he was there a long time ago. So there is a disconnect. I understood Frank's opinion completely. And this was kind of my contention as well when Todd brought this up, is like the fact that Pete makes $400,000 from his blog is, to me, it doesn't mix the message at all. I mean, Pete reached financial independence by saving and by investing in low-cost index funds. Whether he literally won the lottery 20 years later or became Mr. Money Mustache and makes a decent bit of money from his blog, to me is irrelevant to the actual message of how did I reach FI? That is the essence. So I agree with Todd that the business asset class is an interesting one and should be pursued, but it's not a lottery ticket. And frankly, it's not something that everyone can just succeed in, even if they try hard. Someone else asked on the blog about me talking about my own journey. I know I've kind of alluded to this in maybe the second episode on the podcast, so 70 plus episodes ago, but I was on a 7-year journey, basically of failure after failure after failure, creating different websites and drop shipping sites and passion sites about like soccer, which is one of my loves in life. And, these things went nowhere. And I did keep trying just because it was something that I enjoyed, but it wasn't some master plan of let me create a business to get to FI someday, because no idiot would spend 7 years toiling away at night, like writing soccer championship lists into their dopey computer, right? Like an idiot. I mean, it was crazy how many hours I spent on that, and it came to nothing. So is that something that you can just roll up tomorrow and say, hey, I'm going to have a successful business and get to FI?
Yeah, and it's so worth highlighting the fact that he actually did take the time to walk through the disadvantages of each individual asset class. And this is something you need to highlight. The disadvantage of the business asset class is that it is a time suck. it will steal your life away from you in most cases. You know, the tagline that I've seen and I've started using myself is, you know, entrepreneurs are willing to work 80 hours for themselves to avoid working 40 for the man. Writing a blog is not passive. Writing a blog, it may be passive at some point, but it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of dedication. And we're actually going to bring on someone. We're going to bring on Bobby from Millennial Money Man this upcoming Monday to actually talk to us specifically about what that process of building a blog looks like from scratch. I mean, this is someone that did not reach 5 before they started a blog and has done pretty well with it. So that's going to be a very interesting story. But when you're looking through these asset classes, I love that he talked about the unique advantages and disadvantages of each. And then once you pin down what those are, you can start to say, do those characteristics suit my life? Does that sound like something I would be comfortable doing? And I love Alan. Alan in our Facebook group basically says, I'm lazy. That's why I do index investing. That's the perfect way of looking at it. And it's the way that I look at it. So with how I want to approach this game, personally, I don't care if I beat the market. I just want to keep up with the market. I've decided for myself that I'm perfectly satisfied with what those returns look like over time, especially if you have a long enough runway. And so instead of me trying to put all my extra energy into trying to cobble together my 2 or 3 or 4% or mitigate the risk through risk management, instead, I'm taking the lazy approach. I'm doing the index investing, and that's a set and forget philosophy. And then now I'm looking at the other 2 asset classes. So like focusing on building a business. We've had some success building this business over the last year. That's something that I continue to put all my extra time into. It's amazing how it's something that just started at maybe a couple hours a week and quickly became something that I was working on 60 to 80 hours a week. And now it's back down into the realm of reason. But so I can firsthand identify with the fact that starting your own business can be a passion project, but if you're not careful, it can run away with every free second in your life. So there are definitely disadvantages to that as well, but it also can be something that you need to consider. There may be room for it in your life. And then for the real estate, Brad, I know that you're acutely aware of how bad real estate can go if you get it wrong, and also that there is a significant upside if you get it right.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Jonathan. I mean, one of my biggest financial mistakes ever, my single biggest financial mistake ever, was buying real estate basically at the top of the bubble. And I got caught up in the mania, and I was not terribly intelligent, and I didn't do my due diligence, and I am still paying for that. So that was just something that, you know, we talk about biases that are in our own brains. That has certainly clouded my judgment for real estate ever since. So for me, real estate is something that gives me the shakes, basically. You know, it freaks me out. But that's because I had a terrible experience, and it was because I didn't, again, do any diligence, and I didn't think of it as a business. I just thought of it as a get rich quick scheme. And of course you're going to fail in life if you look at things like that. Like, that was just not terribly smart. So I know that I need to get over that, and I'm trying to learn now. You know, Chad Carson just came out with a real estate investing course that I'm going to take. I am, like I said, trying to learn more about the crowdfunding, investing, and ways that I can invest without getting that nervousness up, which is really what it boils down to for me. Is that, like, for me, owning my own rental real estate property is something that scares me. It would keep me up at night, and it would not fit for my own personality at this point. Could I see investing a few $1,000s in a hard money loan on Pier Street, or multiple investment properties on Fundrise or something like that? You know, like, these are just crowdfunding sites that I've come across recently that are interesting, right? So I don't know enough at this point to tell the audience out there if this is a good investment or bad, but it's something I'm trying to overcome my own issues. So yeah, I mean, Jonathan, that's a really good point.
Dude, how about this? 2018, I'm setting a goal for myself. I have no real estate experience, but I'm going to try and leverage my network, and I'm going to try and learn from Coach Carson and maybe Scott Trench going into 2018. And I'm going to see if I can cobble together enough knowledge to get my first fourplex, put a down payment on a fourplex. That's my goal for the end of 2018. If you remember, the goal for the end of 2017 was to develop a podcast and a website. And we said, we're going to experiment this. We may fall flat on our face, but we're going to document the whole process for you. And, you know, our audience has been here with us for that ride. 2018, we're going to try to be upfront about looking into some of these other asset classes. We're going to bring Coach Carson back on many times to kind of help walk us through this. And my goal for the end of 2018 is to get a fourplex. I don't know if it'll be local here in Richmond or it'll be somewhere else in the country, but I'm going to kind of just stumble my way through this and hopefully get enough knowledge from mentors that are freely offering this information so that I can maybe take this next step in my own journey and hopefully share that with the people that are listening to this podcast episode. If they're thinking, how do you go from knowing nothing about real estate to getting started in something? And Brad, if you want, I'd be more than happy to let you tag team that fourplex with me. Do you want in on that?
Wow, that as usual, you're sandbagging me with something that I've never heard of before.
Once a week, guys. Once a week.
But
sorry, Laura.
It sounds interesting. It sounds very interesting. I am potentially interested. So yeah, let's go down that road. But more importantly, it's these experiments in financial independence, right, Jonathan? That's when we first started this podcast a year ago. That was our main tagline, and that's where we thought the show would go. Now, obviously, in the intervening months, it's turned into this true community. And I think that's what we've latched onto is like, we want this to be a place where we can all share thoughts, share ideas, crowdsource everything. And it's kind of stepped away from that experiments in financial independence to a degree, but it's always there. We do need to experiment. We do need to expand our horizons. And anytime we get dogmatic, and as Todd called it, the quote, universal truth, right? It kind of sarcastically about index fund investing being the only way to invest. Like whenever we get dogmatic about things, it's probably time to investigate other options, right? Like it's never a good idea to just shut your eyes and shut your ears and just say, all right, this is it. And this is how I'm going to invest forever. I think that is a big takeaway for me personally from this Todd episode is that like, we just need to think. We all need to try to learn, try to broaden horizons and not be dogmatic. If that means learning about risk management, like Todd is talking about, I don't know the first thing about risk mitigation, risk management on some systemic method that Todd evidently does, right? Like that is so beyond my scope of knowledge that it's laughable. But as soon as he said that, and then I immediately brought that Warren Buffett quote back into it on the Monday episode. Okay, you have a couple smart people saying something. Hey, maybe it's time to look into this. Maybe you can't just stick your head in the sand and say, I'm just going to put all my money in a Vanguard index fund and let it ride. Like, okay, it's time for me to learn. So that's the big takeaway. And I hope everyone out there in this FI community, like we are smart people. We are obviously contrarians ourselves just by the sheer virtue of being in the FI community. So let's extend that. Let's all try to learn and let's share it, right? Like we can still crowdsource that here at Choose FI. While everybody has their personal path and that's important, we can crowdsource information. We can bring anybody on this podcast, even if they're a listener, if there's some worldwide expert, we can try to get people on. So that's what we want to do. We want to crowdsource this. We want to think. We want to be contrarian, and we need to move forward intelligently.
So if you're on our email list, you do get access to a form to give us the suggestion or a possible guest for a future show. Actually, it's more than that. So first of all, let me tell you how to get on the email list. Just go to choosefi.com/vault. That will give you an option to subscribe to the form, which gives you access to all of our financial resources and calculators. There's so many different calculators and resources in the vault, and you get free access when you subscribe. But then I think you get a second email from us within a week or so asking you if you want to suggest a topic or guest for a future show. And if you feel like you have something to add to that conversation, please, we'd love to know. We'd love to get your feedback. All right, guys, so we got some feedback on this episode from Trent, and he says, I think the point is that stocks and bonds returns are hurt by inflation, where real estate tends to move positively with inflation. I can't speak to the truth of his position, but I would say his asset allocation and his safe withdrawal rate rely on multiple variables, and the length of retirement is a major one of them over a longer 40 to 60-year horizon. Equity returns are the highest. If your plan is well constructed to mitigate the volatility, this is most people's best bet. He says, I consider Early Retirement Now Safe Withdrawal Series, as well as this earlier post tangentially related to these topics, to be the absolute Bible on the matter. It really is unbelievable that he put that together and gave it for free. He said, Jonathan, I would love it if you guys would have Big Earn on sometime to react to some of these specific points, since they have similar backgrounds and skill sets. To which I responded, that is so interesting. Wouldn't it be a coincidence if two podcasters had a similar thought a couple weeks ago and actually sent Big Earn a request to get his specific thoughts on this episode? And I can tell you that Big Earn did have thoughts on this episode, and he sent it back to us, and we're going to play it for you on the show today.
Hi, this is Earn from the Early Retirement Now blog. Thanks for inviting me to comment on the episode with Todd. There was so much great material in this episode that I can talk about only a few items. So number one is the discussion about inflation risk. Just like Todd, I'm concerned that the next recession and bear market will look very different from the last two. Over the last 35 years or so, we have been spoiled as investors because you could use bonds as a diversifying asset. And if stocks go down, then bonds go up. But what happens if we have a different kind of recession next time? Or something like the 1970s and early 80s? What happens if the Federal Reserve is too aggressive in tightening monetary policy? That would be bad for both stocks and bonds. And by the way, just like Todd, I'm not predicting when that next recession will happen, and I'm not predicting that the next recession will indeed sink both stocks and bonds. I'm just saying that my personal risk model should be aware of this risk. I don't want to become complacent and assume that bonds will forever behave the way they did over the last 30 years. Also, by the way, if you look at the detailed inflation data released every month, what's the one component that has been above average for the last 5 years or so? It's rental inflation, which brings us to item number 2, real estate investing. I agree with Todd that if you limit yourself to only liquid assets, only stocks and bonds, you could be missing out. Of course, the caveat is that it's not for everybody. If you're working 80-hour work weeks in your career, you're probably not going to go moonlighting as a landlord. But there are ways around it, right? You could hire a property manager, or you could buy real estate through private equity funds. So real estate is an interesting asset class for building assets. For example, you could do this as a sequence of house hacking transactions, and Coach Carson wrote a lot of interesting material on that. And it's also a very attractive asset class in retirement because you generate an inflation-protected cash flow, and if your portfolio is diversified enough, it's a reliable and predictable income stream. So if someone has a real estate portfolio and it generates, say, 5% net rental income after subtracting all the costs for maintenance, repairs, property management, vacancies, and so on, and that cash flow pays for your retirement expenses, then you can retire with what is effectively a 5% withdrawal rate. Most importantly, you never touch your principal, so that solves the problem of sequence of returns risk. So having some of our assets, not all of them, in real estate should be a wise movement in retirement. Talking about retirement and withdrawal rates, this brings me to item number 3, the safe withdrawal rate. And at the end of the episode, you discussed the 4% rule. And I've obviously written a lot about that topic in my safe withdrawal rate series. It's now 21 parts long. And the one key takeaway I learned from that research is that the only thing more offensive than the 4% part is the word rule. The safe withdrawal rate has to respond to both idiosyncratic characteristics and market conditions. Even over 30 years with capital depletion, I found that the 4% rule was not safe in historical simulations. It's more like a 3.75% rule. And then over longer horizons, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, which is what we're looking at in the FI community, you get down all the way into the low 3% range. And by the way, I post how I do all the calculations. So part 7 of the series has a link to a Google sheet where you can run your own numbers. And again, personally, I cannot make the 4% rule work for me personally in the historical simulations. Even if I take into account a pension and Social Security, personally, I would never go up above 3.5% in today's environment. The fourth and final issue I wanted to address: can the withdrawal strategy be improved? During the 4% rule discussion, Todd mentioned that he can increase the 4% withdrawal rate through what he calls smart portfolio allocation and portfolio construction and risk management. I'm looking forward to some of the comments in the Facebook group because this claim might rub some people the wrong way, say the boogleheads of the world. And in Todd's defense, I have to say that he has a point. Just because actively picking stocks is likely a futile exercise and index investing is the way to go, doesn't mean that you have to be passive in your investing decisions everywhere and all the time. So, for example, actively timing the weights across asset classes, so not within, but across stocks versus bonds versus money market, is something that could potentially reduce the drawdowns during recessions, and it would alleviate some of the sequence of returns risk. So if we go into another recession, then reduce the equity exposure, and if stocks and bonds have a negative correlation, so bonds are a good diversifier, then move into bonds, and otherwise you go into cash. But it's very hard to get this market timing right. Obviously, I wish Todd all the luck in the world, but I personally think that doing this right is not easy. This takes more than just saying, hey, I used to work in finance, I'm smarter than everybody else, and I'll beat the static asset allocation. And in fact, even a lot of finance professionals doing this as a full-time job don't get it right all the time. I know a lot of hedge fund guys that blew up in 2007, 8, and 9, and believe me, they all had risk models and they were still caught off guard. And then you also get the flip side. I know a lot of hedge funds that failed afterwards. And you know why? They were so good at risk management that they missed out on the upside. And I'm being sarcastic here. So here's a fun fact. Since December 2012, the S&P 500 rose by more than 100%, and the HFRI index, which is an index that tracks the performance of a large universe of hedge funds, is up by only 25% through 2017. And you could say that hedge funds also have less risk than the S&P 500, but even a 60-40 portfolio is up 64%. That's way more than the average hedge fund, and it's done with a very static asset allocation. So again, in theory, timing the asset allocation to get lower drawdowns in the next recession is a great idea, but the implementation is hard. It's something that we should probably discuss more, and maybe Todd can share his ideas and I can share my thoughts, but it's not so easy. So in any case, to wrap up, this was a great episode as always. This will generate a lot of good discussions in the Facebook group and in the community in general. And there was a lot of thought-provoking material. And this is what we're about in the FIRE community, and especially at Choosify. And there isn't one single path to succeed. And the best way to find your personal path is to hear what others do and see what works for you and what doesn't. So have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody, and spread the fire.
Wow. I just absolutely love Big Earn. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I love his perspective. He is obviously so intelligent and knows the numbers inside and out, but he focuses on what's realistic, right? And he actually gets what drives people. And I think that's just such an important part that is often missing from the ultra math optimizers. And I really commend Earn for taking that approach and seeing that what drives people is not just the math all the time. And I think what he talked about there was the implementation, right? Which is basically saying the devil is in the details. So sure, it sounds great in theory that there are all these hedge fund guys out there who come up with these ultra complex theories on how to beat the market or at least do the risk mitigation, risk management, and that sounds good, right? There are lots of PhDs who have come up with methods, but in practice, it's pretty darn difficult to do. And like he quoted, and that reminds me of Warren Buffett's 10-year bet against any hedge fund manager and fund of funds of hedge funds who would take him basically, including fees, against the S&P 500. And the S&P 500 absolutely destroyed this handpicked best of the best hedge funds. And that's people who are getting paid billions of dollars, literally billions with a B, for their utter brilliance in their hedge fund management. And they're just getting trounced by the S&P 500. Now, fees have a lot to do with that. That's what we talk about here. So I'm not saying that the S&P 500 or Vanguard low-cost index fund is the best for everybody. But I think on the whole, when you take fees into account, when you take the fact that there's a lot of luck to this, even for people who have these quote-unquote brilliant models, right? they're not right all that often, as evidenced by the actual results. They have great theories, but sometimes it doesn't work. And frankly, most people out there don't have the time to spend thousands of hours to come up with the expertise and these random theories and then to see it through, right? Like if you're just taking a bet, an actual bet, and not to bring it back to Mr. Buffett, but that's how I look at life. It's like, what is my best bet going forward? If this were just a straight, I'm putting money on the outcome, I would put it on the S&P 500 or a total stock market index fund. And especially when you take into account the amount of time or lack thereof that you need to include. So that's why I choose that for my own personal life. But I don't discount the fact that there are potentially models that can figure this out, but the devil is in the details and the implementation is the tough part.
But I think it goes to where do you want to invest your time? And for me, invest it in yourself, invest in knowledge, invest in like, what's that next thing that you want to do? There's so many different levers that we have talked about. But at the end of the day, if you invest in yourself, you're going to win. So, invest in your health, invest in just a baseline knowledge of how to get your savings rate up, frugality, invest in intentional living, invest in just the time to actually track where your money is actually going. Get some baseline of savings. Start thinking about, if I wanted to start a side hustle or a business, what would I like to do? If you wanted to dabble in real estate, what would you like to do? But the bar to entry to all of these other avenues gets easier when you've locked down the pillars of FI that we talked about earlier. When you start locking down this intentional lifestyle, it allows you to design a future. And that's why it's exciting that so many of you have decided to join us twice a week for this show. And it's why we're going to continue to go out and we're going to explore all the different ways that people are tackling this game. And we're going to continue to share that with you and get their actionable takeaways so that you can figure out, what's that one thing that I want to do this next week? And I just have to finish this by sharing this. So Christian has been listening to this show for a little bit. He wanted to share with us his new 2018 goals. And this is going to take a few seconds. So I'm going to just give me a little space here. I'm going to go through them with you. 2018 goals. Financial. Have a greater than 50% savings rate. Max 401k times 2 and max my IRAs times 2. Learn the new tax bill to minimize taxes. Increase net worth by 20%. Learn how to do travel rewards. Health and fitness goals, gain up to 168 pounds during the winter and then cut back down to 154 during the summer. Work out 5 days per week. Bike, be able to do 10 consecutive muscle ups, practice intermittent fasting 5 days a week, switch to a plant-based diet, life balance and family, stop accumulating stuff and learn to let go, have a vacation in the Philippines for a month, have a Europe vacation, travel to Cuba, visit Lake Tahoe, come back to Catalina, learn how to woodwork and carpentry, create, don't consume. This is what investing in yourself looks like. This is inspiring. This is what lights you up and your life will be happier. And ultimately, we said, FI in many cases is linked arm in arm to happiness. And so find out what makes you happy and design a future that allows you to spend more time doing those things. Don't allow yourself to get so worked up into a state of perpetual anxiety that you end up drifting through life. Hopefully the tools that we're talking about on the show, the stories that we're talking about on the show, and the actionable tips that our guests are so selflessly giving away will help you design a life that you can get excited about living into. That's where this comes back to. That's what this all comes back to. It's all interwoven. This is your life. What do you want to do with it? And I promise you that if you're just blowing through every evening watching a Grey's Anatomy rerun, it's not going to get you there. Read, rinse, regurgitate, repeat.
Yeah, and Jonathan, the important part is everybody needs to figure out what lights them up, right? And what they get value out of, what their path looks like. There were a ton of people who listened to this episode with Todd Tressiter who said this was hands down our best episode. They loved it. Have more like this. I get that. I love that. I love that this episode was kind of polarizing to a degree, but that so many people really loved it because they want the complexity. They want the nuance. And I understand that. There's a significant portion of our audience that is craving that. I do get it. It's funny, like we all just work differently, right? Todd talked about level 1 versus level 2 understanding. What's funny, like, again, this reveals your own issues, your own biases. And I know in my life, like I don't pursue level 2 understanding at much of anything. And that is a weakness. But that is something that I've built my life to crave simplicity. Like that is what I'm going for. I've set my life up. So except for this podcast and community, which is now taking up a ton of time, which is wonderful. But before then, I had set it up so my life was basically on autopilot. Everything was just optimized and running perfectly. And I could try to dabble. Like Tim Ferriss kind of jokingly calls himself a professional dilettante. And like that's similar, like it's an 80-20 analysis, and he focuses on the 80%, right? Like what will get me 80% of the results with just 20% of the inputs. And that's kind of the tack that I've taken in my own life. And sure, I can say that's a negative, but it's been hugely positive. I've been able to make my life wonderfully happy, focus on things that matter to me, focus on my health and financial independence and creating value for people out there. If that means that the side effect is I can't or don't want to focus on that level 2 understanding, then that's just where it falls down. Right. But there are many people who want that deep dive, that 1%, get to the 99+% of knowledge on something. I suspect those are the people that love this episode and want more. I assure you out there, we will bring it. So this is not just the grazing level 1 podcast. There's some of that because that appeals to a lot of people, obviously. But the level 2 dynamic, nuanced, complex, to quote Todd, that stuff is coming. So there is something for everyone here. And we are very aware of that. So please don't think this is for one segment of the population and not for the other. We're bringing everyone into the fold.
Brad, do you remember that point in time when you realized that we had officially gone past our comfort zone and we were in totally new territory, and we were now on the side with our audience, no longer teaching stuff, that we had to share specifically, but now learning right alongside with them?
For me, it was probably when we had Big Arn on the first time, but I'd love to hear where you're going with that.
Yeah, I think that was it as well. But I mean, that's when we start talking about this level 2 stuff, that's where we're placing ourselves. I am no longer interviewing guests where I understand what they're telling me at this point. I am learning it right alongside our audience, which kind of it's probably useful for our audience because I'm asking the questions that they're probably thinking. But certainly we are so far outside of Brad and Jonathan's comfort zone that it's going to make 2018 and beyond very, very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And this was a great way to get that kick-started, right? Here in December 2017 and beyond. So yeah, I absolutely love this. And I really love the conversation. And the comments just continue to pour in. I mean, literally, as we're recording this on Tuesday morning, dozens more comments just came in, and it's kind of hard to keep up with.
So personal thank you to Todd for coming on the show. Wonderful episode. Absolutely loved it. It's providing content that we can riff off of for years and years. So just thank you for coming on the show. All right, so we do have a voicemail that we're going to go and play for you today, and this was from Jason, and I think it actually ties very well to this episode, so I'm excited to play this for you.
Hey, Brad and Jonathan. I just wrapped up episode 51 with Mrs. Mad Money Monster, which is a heck of a coincidence since I just made a big change on Monday. It's quite similar, in fact. She talked about FIOR, and I just started down a similar path inspired by Jillian's Montana Money Adventures, her blog, and her mini retirements class. Maybe we can call my path FIPR, Financial Independence Partial Retirement. And here's how I pulled that off. I have a year's worth of living expenses sitting in my bank as FU money, and I'm already at about half of my FI number and have been for the better part of a year. I just gave notice at work on Monday, and they're thrilled that I gave them plenty of notice and that I can stay on as a consultant part-time. Knowing that now, I reran my numbers, and by working only 500 hours a year, I can leave my FU money alone. It's essentially a gigantic emergency fund now. And that means I get to work just 10 hours a week, and I'm not on a salary. None of this working 60 hours a week, even though you're technically paid for 40. And every year that I do this, my retirement savings continue to grow, thanks to compound interest and all that magic. And in 20 years, when I'm ready to conventionally retire, my savings will be there ready and waiting for me. In the meantime, I can relax and enjoy life way more than before because I'm only working 10 hours a week. Also, if I decide I want to change things up a bit and work some more, like say when my daughter, who's now almost 11, graduates high school, what's to stop me? Nothing. In the meantime, I could spend more time with her. I get to spend more time doing things I'm more interested in and, just working a teeny bit on the side, as it were. And then to top it all off, this actually serves as a hell of a good object lesson for my daughter. She's almost 11, as I said, and she's already on board the FI train. She was saying to me a month or so ago how she noticed that almost every single grown-up she knows really doesn't like their job very much. And she's totally up for saving half of everything she makes and being able to retire in 5 to 10 years, which is, go her. And let me just point out one other thing. I've made plenty of financial mistakes in my life, but I'm 44. I'm a single dad every other week and solo every other week. And I'm still able to be 3/4 retired as of January. That's what a few good decisions, a good dollop of luck and time, of course, and a lot of flexibility can get you. Thank you guys so much for the podcast. Here's hoping this call helps someone else come up with a creative solution for their own weird, unusual, or out of their situation. Take care, guys.
What I love about that is that it highlights the different paths that people take to FI. And what I love about that is that is what risk management looks like when it's done perfectly, right? And talk about implementation. If you take that approach, you're just good to go.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely. I'm almost speechless. I don't really have anything to respond other than that is exactly what we've been talking about here on the podcast for an entire year, is having these options, implementing them, figuring out what the path is for you, for your family, second generation FI. I mean, it covers everything. So thank you for the amazing voicemail.
All right, guys, well, that's it. Unfortunately, that's going to bring this episode to a close. As you guys know, we like to finish every episode by doing a drawing for a copy of a book that we found useful. We have two books. We have Dominic Cortuccio's book, Design Your Future, and J.L. Collins' book, The Simple Path to Wealth. We also just released our official Choose FI t-shirt. And so if you'd rather have a t-shirt instead, just let us know. We can make that happen. If you want to enter the drawing, very simple. The way it works, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes, follow the instructions there, and leave us a short written review. And then just send us an email to feedback@choosefi.com, just letting us know that you left a review and what screen name you left it under. And then every Friday on the Friday Roundup, we announce the winners. So Brad, how many winners do we have today?
All right, Jonathan, we have one winner, and the winner is Sean. And actually, talk about timely here. This is really interesting that he references Todd's episode already. And it's great podcast with timely releases. Choose FI is a great podcast. They release twice per week, which is a perfect amount for my drive to and from work. Episode 52 so far is my favorite, as it gives some examples of methods of reaching FI that challenges the traditional FIRE message.
Wow, that is so cool. I love the timely releases part. You know, Brad, I was looking at the calendar, and Monday will fall on the 25th of December this year, so we have to have a Christmas episode lined up. I think we got one. I think we're going to make it our year in review. I wonder if anybody's going to listen to it, but it will be there for you guys, timely as usual. All right, guys, one quick favor before I let you go today. If you got value from this show, if you've been getting value from the weekly episodes and you haven't done it yet, just take 1 second, press the subscribe button on the platform that you're listening to this on. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, we're on Player FM, Podcast Addict. You know, we are on your player of choice. Take a second, press the subscribe button. It just lets the platforms know that you're getting value from the show, helps us rank more highly, and it basically just says to them, I want to be there when they produce new content. We so appreciate you. Thank you for being here with us on this journey. The fire is spreading, my friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.